about the possibility of good democracy in Asia. 3 years ago, a group of Korean professors started the research project of democracy, which evaluates democracy from the perspective of qualities of democracy. And we started this project because after democratization, under a very democratized political background, the Korean democracy is getting worse than we expected. The economic performance in terms of inequality is not good. And the society is splitting between liberal and conservative camps. And the policy in the assembly is very noisy. So we are losing confidence in democracy, losing some kind of hope for the peaceful democracy, we might say. And we found out to recognize that kind of problem is not just ours, and some other advanced countries has the same problem, such as the 1%, 99% arguments in Wall Street in the United States, and the new democracies are hanging around the authoritarian regime, not going toward the democracy. So we held international conference for the democracy, the search of good democracy in Asia, inviting several notable professors from China, Japan, India, including many professors in Korea too. So this is the paper that I presented. The original version of this paper was presented at that conference, and I'm improving it now. So it's not a perfect version yet. So this is a kind of overview of the whole project, our research project, and there would be an introduction of our project. So let me start. This is co-authored by the Professor Hyuk Lee there, and he is in charge of the whole research project team. So this is half of the efforts was made by Professor Hyuk Lee. The quality of democracy. When we started this project, we didn't know that there are such a huge accumulation of knowledge, existing studies already in this area. But we coincidentally we shared a lot of similar ideas with them. So we exchanged some basic ideas with them and developed it further. So the quality of democracy and the search of good democracy is a relatively new in comparative politics, new subject. And thus there has been some applauses and also doubts and backlashes from the Schumpeterians. Schumpeterians are, most of the comparative politics students and scholars are Schumpeterians, I believe. We argue that democracy should be re-evaluated in terms of quality, but the challenging groups are questioning that if there is a good democracy, then is there a bad democracy too? Intrinsically, democracy is good, but how can you say bad democracy? But in other area of subject, we are using good. In the previous session, former president of Pakistan, bank, referred to good governance. And there are many studies and research groups on good governance. And we usually talk about good society too. And usually good, the term good, does not seem to be an academic word, especially in political science. It's a very relativist and subjective, and it's a kind of danger to use it as a scientific term. But that's what we are trying to do. So the background of this study is that mostly from the disappointment from the reality. The first one is the disappointment with the new democracies. Paradoxically, after the period of global democratization, the new emerging democracies were expected to be consolidated at the democracy at its final stage. But among about 150 states moving toward democracy, only 20 or less countries were consolidated, including Korea, only few. And the rest of them are hung between the authoritarian state and democracy, an unfinished journey. But is it only unfinished? Most of the students, some scholars, questioned about their transition, their possibility of finishing their journey. There would be the final stage of democratization, not democracy, but something else around it between the democracy and authoritarianism. So suddenly, democracies, as well as the gray zone, as Carruthers referred to, gray zone countries in the gray zone are the object of our study. So we want to include the countries. The second disappointment is the established democracies too. Protests and demonstrations are occurring in advanced capitalist countries. The retrogression of welfare, growing inequality might be the underlying problem. And political splits, conflicts, and violent movements are also occurring. So there are questioning, are the governments responsive, and accountable? Recently, there are many books about the quality of democracy and quality of capitalism. Capitalism, the recent one might be the Thomas Piketty, Capital in the 21st Century. And years ago, Stiglitz published his book, The Prices of Inequality, and Bartels wrote about the unequal democracy, why the people support a country, a government, where the inequality is growing. So the relationship between inequality and democracy became a big topic. And third one is the frustration of embryonic democracy. When I say embryonic is emerging or potentially growing democracies. In terms of the Freedom House Index, there would be about between 4 and 1, partly free countries. All countries might not be potentially growing. Sometimes some countries would stay there, but that's they are moving or intending to move toward democracy. Then there would be some model. They would need some model. If the Western liberal democracy would not be their final goal, then they would find some their own model. But would they have the fixed target? That's what we doubt. When we say democracy, Western democracy, then Western democracy should be one. But Western democracies are very American democracy, and German democracy, and Swedish democracy, Japanese democracy, and Korean democracies. All of them are different. But based on the index of Freedom House, they are the same. Korea is not same. Korea ranked at 2 recently. All of them are 1, but they are different, and they are changing their figures too. So, from the perspective of emerging democracies, hoping democracies like China, what would be the target? They might have a moving target. So we need some kind of, we need to develop some kind of criteria. Democracy is not just the election. Then we need to develop some kind of qualitative aspects of democracy. That's what we are arguing, but I think it's a very different and very difficult job. So we are studying. Okay, what our project want to do? First, redefining democracy from the quality of democracy perspective, re-evaluate and critique the Schumpeterian definition. It's a strong fortress, so we cannot deny that, we cannot challenge it. But from re-evaluating Schumpeteria, we want to find some clues from the small box or rooms of Schumpeter. So we brought tentatively brought 4 pillars that hold up the quality of democracy: procedure, effectiveness, performance, and integration. I will show you a paradigm and some elements behind these 4 pillars. Why and how these 4 pillars are important. We will provide some theoretical etiquettes and existing works and our edition. So let's see the existing studies on the quality of democracy first. The first scholar of the quality of political system might be Aristotle, when he said good and corrupt forms of democracy, but democracy was not his ideal form, although. And quite recently, the more recent devotion was made by Arendt Leipart when he wrote about the patterns of democracy, majoritarian consensus model of democracy. And he gave us a good clue to our study. And he talked about the quality evaluation of democracies. And he said that consensus model of democracy might be kinder and gentler. Kinder and gentler is quite a subjective word and very difficult to assess. That would be a good start too. And Guillermo O'Donnell he passed away, I think, in 2012. He devoted himself ardently about the new democracies in Latin America and somewhere else. And he also brought about the topic of qualitative democracy in South America. He disappointed a lot with the democratic transitions in Latin America. And he brought the moral concept of government. Molino brought the good government. Good might be his own brand. We didn't copied it, but hopefully it was coincidentally we used the same. Ringen wrote a book about what democracy is for. So democracy should be evaluated not the procedural form, but with the contents and consequences of the system. There are many, and Schumpeter. So re-evaluating Schumpeter, our focus is that when Schumpeter says that democracy is only election, nothing more and nothing less, don't expect too much from the democracy. Democracy doesn't bring any rational decision, public good, responsible representation, but it only brings the conflict resolution with participation. Then what is democracy for if election or democracy does not bring any equality, consensus, or agreement? That's what we're arguing for. There are the limits of minimal democracy, as I told you. This part, the components of good democracy, we suggest 4 pillars. Procedure, that's the Schumpeterian. Effectiveness is the effectiveness of representation, accountability, and responsiveness. We believe that procedure and effectiveness of representation is quite different thing. Performance is economic growth, equality, and welfare. Integration is communication, consensus, and trust. Let's see. This is the diagram. Democracy is supported by 4 pillars, and sub-elements are procedure, participation, and competition are typical components of procedural democracy. Performance, economic growth, equality, and welfare. Effectiveness and integration. We are trying to find out the indicators and the data set. We are not creating it, but we are collecting it for a valid, suitable data set for this. And we want to find out some patterns around the world, how the result might be different from the patterns that has been made based on the Freedom House Index or Polity 4 Index. Let me skip the 4 pillar parts. And based on if we successfully find out the quality indicators of democracy, then there might be some different forms of democracy, various forms of democracy. So we are trying to repattern the democracies in existing democracies, new democracies, and illiberal democracies, authoritarian systems at the same time on the same dimension. So that's what we're trying to do. So our first job is not made yet, but the first by the end of next June, we are planning to finish the tentative list of data and indicators, and we'll try to reveal the Asian countries first, and then we want to expand the rest of the world. Okay, Asia, good democracy in Asia. Asia has only 5 nations as democracy. Among 35 nations. It's less than the ratio of democracies, less than the African states. Sub-Saharan African states, they have already 10. We have only 5. So, before moving democracy, the social design will not be completed as we want it to, but we need some kind of concept or paths toward democracy before our democratization start or democratization finishes. So for Asia, we want to develop the concept of good democracy and propose it. That's our objective. Thank you very much.